Hello and welcome to this episode of Benchmarks in Transition. In this episode we'll start to look at LIBOR fallback. In this context, LIBOR fallback is what happens to your LIBOR derivatives when LIBOR does not exist anymore. This episode is simply an overview of the issue, and the next 2 or 3 episodes will look at it in more details. Enjoy!
This is the first of 4 episodes related to the LIBOR fallback. In this episode, we describe an overview of the situation. First, we have to describe the meaning of fallback in this context. For derivatives, they are traded now and they are linked to LIBOR. But there is an expectation that LIBOR may cease to exist in 2022. The derivatives that are linked to LIBOR, what happened to them when LIBOR does not exist. So that's the fallback in one sentence. Now, if you look at today's contracts, you have two worlds, the bilateral world and the CCP world. Let's look first at the bilateral side, which are most of them governed by ISDA master agreement. In the case that LIBOR is not published, the description in the contract or in the ISDA definition is that the calculation agent has to call reference banks and ask them to provide a quotation. Obviously, if LIBOR does not exist anymore, it means that we are in the situation when the different banks in the panel and the administrators have decided collectively or individually that the situation is not good enough to continue to provide quotation in this well-administered situation. So the bank don't provide data anymore. Now, if with all the governance and process around it, banks do not want to provide data, obviously if you call one bank individually to ask what should be the rate, in the same way, they will not answer. So it is quite clear that this will not work properly. On the CCP side, the house rules are roughly a copy and paste of the ISDA master agreement, except for some small details. And one of those details is what is happening in case the rate is unavailable. The LCH rule is on the screen, and it says that in that case, the clearinghouse will decide of an alternative rate at his sole discretion. So the important part is at his sole discretion, meaning that the derivative user have no choice and don't know what will happen. So let's try to summarize that in a couple of formulas. LIBOR coupon payoff, it's a LIBOR amount that I will denote by L. And it is decided, fixed on a certain date, which is theta on the screen. So if you open a textbook, what you will see is that there is a LIBOR payoff, that's clear, and then to value that, you have to discount it, discounting in some way, and take the expectation of the result. So standard thing. Now, this is a simplified view of the world because in reality, you don't know if LIBOR will be published. So you have to divide the situation in two cases. The first one is if the fixing date theta is before the discontinuation, so discontinuation has not taken place yet, you get what you expect, you get the LIBOR rate. Now, if the discontinuation is before the fixing, so if at the moment where you have to look at the rate, it does not exist anymore, what will happen? That we don't know. And that's why in this formula, I've put in that blue circle a question mark. It's not a typo, it's the really we don't know what will happen. And the fallback is to try to solve that problem and replace that question mark by something a little bit more precise. So let's explain that into a timeline. So I'm starting at the top left. We are today. We expect the discontinuation to come maybe in 2022. And if the discontinuation comes, also we expect that there will be an announcement, probably a couple of months earlier, to say that the actual discontinuation will take place. Now, let's move forward. If we are after that discontinuation date, and I have a LIBOR payment that was supposed to fix on that date, theta, and was supposed to pay somewhere here. So we are in the situation that LIBOR does not exist. We should have received this red amount, which is LIBOR, but LIBOR does not exist, and we are in this question mark situation. The proposal by ISDA is to replace that one quantity LIBOR by the sum of two parts, one which is a floating rate linked to the overnight rates. That will be discussed what is exactly proposed in the next episode, but for the moment it's a floating rate. Plus, on top of it, we will add a spread. What the spread is has to be discussed, so it can be higher or lower, but that will be also the discussion in a forthcoming episode a little bit later for the detail of that. Now, what are the qualities? What do we want with this replacement of this red quantity by the blue plus the gray? So that's the next slide. We want a certain number of things to happen. Obviously, we want something which we understand what it is. So we have to replace this question mark by something. And by doing that, we want to have no value transfer. We don't want some people to lose and some people to gain from it. So we want the absence of value transfer. What does that mean? Let's look at it here. We'd like that the red is roughly equal to the blue plus the gray. Now, this is not clear what that means, because when should I look at that? Should I look at it from today, or from the discontinuation, or from the fixing date? You may have something which looks fair from today, but when we come to the fixing, it's not fair anymore. So it's not even clear what absence of value transfer means. But in all cases, I'd like to have this thing, this spread to be in line with what should have been the LIBOR. Then another quality we want is absence of manipulation. So that manipulation existed in the LIBOR. That's one of the reasons we want to change. We don't want to have the same manipulation happening now. If we go back again to this slide, this manipulation can be on this floating rate or on the spread. If I was able to put the spread lower, if I have to pay the quantity that's good for me, if I'm receiving the quantity, I may want to try to put the spread higher to receive more. So here there is a double chance of manipulation, if you want, one on the floating rate and one on the spread. Note that the spread will be fixed on the announcement date. So on this date, there will be a fixing that will be there forever. So there is even more chance or more interest in manipulating the spread, because it will be one number that will be used for many contracts. So that's something we have to look at. Another point that we'd like to have in this transition is consistency. Consistency can be viewed at many levels. It can be viewed at the level of currencies. I'd like to have the same in euro and in dollar. That we already know it will not be the case. Dollar is moving for SOFR, which is a secured rate. Euro is moving to Euro STR, which is an unsecured rate, and the rate at which the banks are borrowing from their client, so a bid rate. You can ask the consistency at the instrument type level, for example, between derivatives and cash loans. That we know also that it will not be the case. The committees that take the decision for the fallback description are not the same for the different asset classes. And it was already decided that those fallback procedure will not be the same between the different ones. Then there is a more subtle consistency is for a given LIBOR on a given date. Let's say I take US dollar LIBOR 3 months fixed on the 18th of August 2022. If I want, do I have that this rate will be the same for all the derivatives fixing on that specific date? Unfortunately, it seems that the answer will be no. We will not even have a consistency at that level, and that again will be discussed in the next episode. Then once you have decided of the fallback, you have to make sure also that it is in a more vague sense in line with what we have. We don't want this new fallback to be something exotic that we have never seen, that we don't know how to risk manage. So what we replace LIBOR with has to be something we can deal with easily without too much complexity. On the derivative side, there were many consultations done by ISDA to look at this fallback question. The first consultation around 18 months ago was related to sterling, Swiss, Japanese yen, and Aussie dollar, and the result of that were published on the 27th of November 18. I mentioned the date because we will see it explicitly when we discuss value transfer later in the market data. Later, a consultation was done on dollar. It was roughly the same question and the same answer as for the other currencies, but it was done in a separate consultation because when the first consultation was out, all the decision on the dollar has not been done. The SOFR rates was very new at that time. Then there was another consultation on the spread detail. Again, if I go back to the previous slide, the question was this spread, what should we put it, lower, higher? Obviously, the question was not asked in those terms, but what asked in technical terms, how should we compute this number? So those results were published on the 23rd of October 19. Again, for some currencies, you can see that date in the market movement. A consultation was done at the beginning of this year related to euro. That has not too much impact because for the euro, the main IBOR rate is Euribor, and we don't expect Euribor to be discontinued in 22. There is an expectation that it will last for a couple of years more, so the results are not so extreme in the euro case. Finally, there is a consultation on pre-secession that ended a couple of days ago, and we don't have the answer yet. First, I need to describe what pre-secession means. So we have this usual timeline. Now, the discontinuation may be announced and take place in, let's say, January 22, but before, in the period before, maybe at some stage, the regulator, in the case of LIBOR, the FCA, may indicate that the LIBOR is not representative anymore. It is still published, but the regulator thinks that it is not relevant in some sense for the market. It means that it is published, so you can still read it, but the regulators would like you not to use it. What should you do with your legacy contract? They are still fully valid. The LIBOR is still published, so should you continue to use it? Pre-secession means that You think that not, though that a third party, regulator in this case, announcing something will be enough for your contract with your counterparty to be changed. So that's still an open question, and we don't know exactly what will be decided there. So all the discussion I'm doing on this fallback is conditional in the sense that we have the ISDA consultation, we have the descriptions, but they are still a little bit vague, they are not very precise, so we don't know exactly all the final details. We'll do our best to describe what could be done, but the final details are not announced yet. A couple of months ago, ISDA announced that it's expected to publish the final wording late April and early May, but with the crisis in the meantime, we don't know if those dates are still valid or not. So this was the overview of the fallback. We now have to go and in details at those two quantities. So on one side, the blue, the floating rate, and on the other side, the spread, where do we want to put it. So that will be the subject of the next two episodes, and this concludes this episode on the overview of the fallback.